Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. In this essay, I'd like to explore when globalization, as we understand it today, when it began. And I'm not talking about globalization as in global trade or that sort of thing, but the globalization project, the mass movement of black and brown peasants to the West, the shutting down of the political marketplace, the neutralizing of the vote as a method of selecting our politicians and governments, the infiltration of our public services, the deliberate creation of social division, gender by race and gender, and the controlling of the information flows that we see and hear, these sorts of things. Now, this is all pieces of the globalist project, the disenfranchising of white people. So intellectually, this occurred in terms of the think tanks when they started, putting up papers and white papers talking about what would become globalization. That really began in the late 1960s, the early 1970s, and was initially, I think, more economic than anything. They were running out of easy money options. The post-World War II rebuilding, the consumer electronics boom. Then they talked about, well, what else can we do? Where else can we find money? Let's bring women into the workforce at lower wages and increase consumption. So yeah, let's do that. And so they're constantly looking for new, easy money, low risk, guaranteed return type situations. And of course, moving lots of peasants into the West is what they see as black and brown peasants. Now, they obviously have to go to where there are surplus populations in the world, and the surplus populations can only be found in black and brown communities such as India and China and Africa and so on. So, and these all economies are pretty much all dirt poor basket cases. Not all, but pretty much. I mean, look at India and the Philippines, places like that. So Indonesia and so on. So there's vast numbers, hundreds of millions of people that can't wait to come to the West to have a better life than they've got in their own basket case countries. Now, why isn't more effort put into making those countries more prosperous and better organised? Well, a lot of money has been thrown at them from say the World Bank and places like that, but they just never seem to get it together. They're always basket cases, in my view, always will be. They just cannot get the social organisation. So the smart thing as a globalist would see it is you move the brown and black peasants to places where the country is well run and well ordered. The buses run on time, and there's running water and sewerage and that sort of thing. Now, how long that's going to last in the West, that's another matter. But anyway, for the moment, that seems to be more. And the globalists have much more control in the West and much less control in these third world chaotic countries. So they bring the people into the West where they have control. Then they can exploit them more effectively. So anyway, that's now. I first started seeing globalization in things like gender conflict. So before there was race conflict was there, and you see it in America between the black population, but in other places in the West they just didn't have that. So there really wasn't that racial element. So they had to run. So something that was uniform across the entire Western sphere was this getting women into the workforce and creating gender conflict, breaking down the family. And they were very successful, the globalists, in really getting all the and bear in mind that in America, the spearhead of this gender division and creating gender conflict, it was not all, but nearly all Jewish lesbians that were running it. Many of them had worked for the Soviet Union as agitators. And yet they, in the late 60s and early 70s, they were very successful in pushing this gender conflict, breaking up the family and so on. Marriage is an oppressive institution, and families have to be done away with. That sort of thing. It's a very Marxist sort of agenda, and it was Ronald Reagan who was the first guy to sign that into law in the United States and California, the so-called so-called freedom-loving, politician and president. So anyway, this was where I first came across it, and I didn't see it at the time as a wider sort of part of a wider sort of globalist project. I just thought, I wonder why they're doing this. This seems odd. Why would any government, why would any politician want to create gender conflict? To dissolve families, to have people bitterly haggling over the house in courts. Why would they want to do that? It doesn't make any sense to me. But governments that I thought would have been right wing or certainly and would never have signed on to that agenda, they did. So the globalists were very successful right across the Western world in getting that divorce, that American family law, as they call it, divorce model applied, and in Britain they went even further, even tougher on men, and it was very much ideological. Certainly, if you bother to go in the courts and have a look and do the research, it was never simply about that they dressed it up as saying, well, it's to protect women, it's to protect children, but those are always the lies they tell. They always tell those lies, like in health emergencies, it's to protect the people. Those are the same lies all the time and have been for centuries. But they use that we're protecting women and children as a thing now. So I first started noticing that. It had probably been going on for a bit earlier, but I first started noticing it in terms of constant newspaper columns and stories in the media. Women are being beaten to death by their husbands. Children are being abused by their fathers. There was a full-on propaganda campaign that really started to pick up in the late 1980s in Australia, but even earlier in the United States. When I first started going to the United States, and I remember reading, particularly say the newspapers around, this is really pre-internet, newspapers around say New York and Boston, Philadelphia, up around that northeast area of the United States. The papers were screaming with propaganda about, Professor who's a lesbian, Rachel Butch-Dyke-Stein, has said that 10,000 women are dying every nanosecond and being beaten to death by their evil straight white male husbands. And I was surprised because in nearly every propaganda piece, it was always a middle-class white guy who was doing it. The biggest threat to the globalization project is the middle-class white guy. It's not the black guy living in the projects. It's not a threat to the globalists. It's the middle-class white guy. And always everything that the globalists pushing, the women are getting oppressed by middle-class white men. Children are being beaten and oppressed, and middle-class white men. The racial problem and middle-class white men. And it just goes on and on and on. So clearly they're targeting the people that are least likely to embrace globalization and have the most to lose from it. So this is very much part of the gig. So I noticed that at the time, but in the late 1990s in Australia, and Australia isn't in a leadership position in terms of pushing globalization, the United States is. There was a politician in Australia that got up and said, look, this globalization, all it's going to mean is a whole lot of brown and black people are going to be coming to the West, that we're going to be swamped by brown people. And this politician got up and said that and pointed out to the administrative changes and a lot of the laws that were happening to immigration in Australia. Now, it was a right-wing government at the time, or centre-right, they wouldn't call them far-right. Needless to say, the left media decried them as all being Nazis and Hitler and so on, the usual stuff. But this was a centre-right government, and I realised sort of back then that they were fully embracing the globalist project. They were 100% on board with it. Now they wouldn't, use the same Marxist language to spruik it, or to shill for it, but they did the same things. It wouldn't have mattered who was in go. So, but by that stage, it was clear that the globalists owned all the major parties. Now, this particular politician got up and made very accurate assessments as to what would happen, and that the Australian people, the Australian electorate, are being screwed over by their own politicians. And this politician was saying, look, we're going to be swamped with brown and black people. They're planning to do it. It's their intention to do it. Your wages are going to fall. Your purchasing power, the price of cost of living is going to go up. You're all going to be big losers. And the native population of Australia was 97, 98% white at the time. We're all going to be losers with these folks coming in. And, sure, they say stories that Iranian are let in people that speak very good English and have the top of the town qualifications at internationally recognised universities. Sure, they say that, but it's bullshit. They're going to bring in peasants by the truckload, and they're going to lower all the standards for literacy and these sorts of things that were otherwise, reasonably high. So anyway, the attack on this, all the major parties, all the leading figures in the major parties, even the smaller parties, all attacked this politician that was calling out the globalization scam. Now remember, this is over 20 years ago. All of them attacked, and they said, no, it's being made up. That's lies. We would never do that. Oh, that's not going to happen. Oh, there's untruths and so on. And that the entire media establishment, went after this politician, called uneducated, moronic, this, Nazi, fascist, Hitler, and so on and so forth. And this politician would get up in meetings and sing the Australian national anthem, and would have the Australian flag there, but still the media packs and Nazi, fascist, Hitler, the usual sort of stuff, racist, and but this politician was completely correct and was really foretelling it as it was going to be. But this in a copybook that reminds me like the January 6th ridiculousness in the US and the way they went after Trump with the impeachments and having lawyers chasing him uphill and down Dale all the time, that sort of thing, just trying to find something, anything to use against him, and using the police and using the Justice Department and the courts, using all of that to go after. And this politician, they went over every micro detail. I mean, no politician could have withstood the scrutiny this politician got. Every micro detail, and if there was even a signature sort of not quite fully on the line of a document, then that would be. And they ended up sending this politician in what, in my view, was a completely rigged case, and a rigged court case, rigged information, and they ended up sending this politician to prison. Can you believe that? Just because the globalists didn't want this voice around, just didn't want any pushback against the mass migration. Now, since that politician was pretty determined to fight back and did so, and they won. They won. The conviction was quashed, and which means like deleted from the books, if you will. And so this politician actually ended up going back into Parliament, but is much more careful as to what's said now. But the point is that politician was completely correct. But it goes to show, just even in the late 1990s, how much the globalists controlled the entire Australian political scene, even back then. And there was a prime minister that was very lukewarm about the globalist project. Some years ago in Australia, he was concerned because it was increasing the cost of living. It was making life worse for the local people here. And so he was rather lukewarm about it. And, the globalists are so powerful, they managed to get his colleagues to turn on him and throw out of office an elected prime minister, and just stick another guy in who the globalists were happier with, who's like an ex merchant banker and all that sort of stuff. Got all the ties in with the big money end of town, which is the globalists, and to stick that guy in because that's who the globalists wanted. That's how much power they had and still have. It's no surprise to see the assault on Donald Trump because he's too rich to get at him, and they had to assail the office of president and use all sorts of means, the Justice Department and so on, to get him. And they've degraded American democracy, they've degraded American justice, they've degraded American public service in the process, all just to bring Trump down. And I don't think the voters of America should ever forgive them for that. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.